I'm talking to Bill Corcoran, who's president of ANERA, American Near East Refugee Aid. You're on your way to Palestine. Just a moment about the work that ANERA does and has been doing over the year, just to introduce it to our viewers.
Sure, Jim. We were created after the '67 war for a way of showing American generosity to families in the Middle East. And so we're an organization that, through individual donations, private foundations, corporations, and governments, spends about $50 million a year in Palestine, Lebanon, and Jordan, and mainly projects for healthcare, education, and economic development.
The Palestinian situation, the refugees, in particular those out of Palestine, has long been ignored by many in the world. They are, in many cases, the forgotten people. Lebanon, I've been there. I've been to the camps in 1971. First time I went, I was horrified. But those were the good years, and it has deteriorated since. And now with the influx of Syrian Palestinian refugees into those camps, it's gotten even more congested. Talk a little bit about the impact of the Syrian influx of refugees into the Palestinian camps.
Well, by everyone's account, the Lebanese Palestinian camps are among the worst around the Middle East. The conditions there have always been strained and stressful for the people. But that was for 250,000 Palestinians who had arrived in the past several years. Now we're looking at a new influx of another 50,000 who are coming in from Syria. That 50,000 has been escorted to the various existing Palestinian camps, and they're taking an overcrowded, decrepit situation and further stretching it. So that right now it's intolerable, and we're seeing a huge rise in the number of domestic disputes simply because people are overwhelmed with their conditions there.
Palestinians in the camps are sort of locked into that situation, and in Lebanon, unable to assimilate into the broader society. But the situation of the Syrians, many of whom are welcome into Lebanon, but Syrians who are of Palestinian descent from the camps in Syria have been ushered, as you said, escorted to the camps, unable to settle into the broader society. That's a real dilemma?
It is, and it's a depressing situation for all involved, because the Palestinians in Syria, about 90% of them were employed, and they were doing well in society and rather mainstreamed there. But when they arrive in Lebanon, they're finding, first of all, that there's no way they can find employment. Only 10% of them now have employment in Lebanon. And they're finding that the cost of living in Lebanon is significantly more expensive for them than it was in Syria. The other thing is we're finding that 70% of the new refugees from Syria into Lebanon, of those Palestinians, 70% of them are women and children. So they have no male companion in the family that's able to work in general society. So they're really living on charity at this point.
Tell me a little about the Syrian Palestinian refugee community. It is very large. As you say, it was doing fairly well. They were fairly well off.
Right.
What's different between this exodus and the Palestinian exodus from Kuwait or the Palestinian exodus from Iraq? Two previous instances in recent years where Palestinians became twice refugee.
Well, I think in this case they're walking out literally with just one suitcase, the shirts on their backs, and by the time that they arrive in a camp in Lebanon, they are absolutely destitute. So at least in some previous situations, they were in many cases middle class or well-educated people. Who had some possibilities of going elsewhere. But these people are now without any ability, and as they find themselves in Lebanon, they don't see any way forward, and they're really not talking about going back because at least 50% of them have seen their homes destroyed. So there's nothing to go back to.
They left Syria because government, because of rebels, because of both fighting. What were the specific circumstances, and do we know the numbers of those who were in Syria and those who've left?
Yeah, of the approximate 250,000 Palestinians that were in Syria, we know that at least 85% of them are now displaced. They're not in their original homes. Now, some are still in Syria, but at least 50,000 have moved to Lebanon. They were in between. They were in between the rebel army and also the Syrian army, and the Palestinians were rather split politically, and so as a result, they've been victims for both sides. So that they really could not get protection long-term from any side within this battle.
I've seen some of the numbers from Lebanon about cases of influenza, cases of diarrhea, cases of all the kinds of ailments that occur among refugees. Quantify, if you can, the problems that you're finding, and how potentially dangerous a situation is it if it persists?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jim, because I think we often look upon it as just a humanitarian disaster for these people, but it also has implications for Lebanon and the general population there, because we're seeing high incidence of problems from the water. About 25% of the children have diarrhea that's quite severe. We're finding high incidence of scabies, and we're also seeing now new problems with respiratory illness, which could lead to a number of epidemic problems. We're concerned about a long range of things, even up to cholera. And so I think in the camps, there's real issues, especially when you crowd 10 to 15 people in the space of one room. There's no possibility of isolating anyone in the family who's ill.
You mentioned some of the social and psychological problems that are developing. Again, in terms of long term, if this persists for a period of time, another year or two, how serious and how aggravated will these problems become?
Of course, it's a bit of a matter of speculation there, but I can tell you, based on what we're seeing right now, that the scenario is not good. Because even the agencies that are serving these refugees are running out of money already. Within the camps, for instance, UNRWA is the main supplier of assistance to the Palestinian refugees. They're running at a $70 million deficit this year. So they're stretched to their limits already to provide for the original Palestinian refugees, let alone the new arrivals. A number of NGOs are working there, but the number is quite small, ANERA being one of them, and a few Scandinavian organizations are working with them, but none of the large organizations who have chosen to work with the greater Syrian population that has flooded into Lebanon. What we're seeing is a large number of domestic disputes, some of them involving violence. We're also seeing a higher increase in street crime and also in prostitution. So that all of these things cannot be contained within the confines of any camp, and it's bound to affect the greater society of Lebanon, all of which leads to concerns for the long-term stability of Lebanon.
The U.S. is doing what, and what can people do if they want to become more supportive?
The U.S. government has been very generous to UNRWA and also to UNHCR for both sets of refugees that have been coming into Lebanon. They're trying to increase their assistance. As a matter of fact, they just spoke with a group from the State Department who will be going over to Lebanon next week to assess it firsthand. That's been good, but it is far from enough. I understand that the U.S. government is trying to encourage more of the Gulf countries to assist in greater amounts. The next step would be the NGOs like ANERA, and if people could look at our website, anera.org, that would be helpful. They could see specifically that we're running a campaign now just for these new waves of Palestinians coming in from Syria. But I think it's important to keep in mind that none of this is going to stay within the camps. None of it's going to be staying within the borders of Lebanon. This has become a regional crisis. And for some of the Palestinians, this is the third time now that they've been refugees. So their sense of frustration and desperation can lead to a number of things.
Bill Corcoran, thank you so much for being with us. These are forgotten people. They need to be remembered, especially at times like this when the needs are as great as they are. And thank you for ANERA being there. You do wonderful work for Palestinian refugees and for refugees throughout the region. Godspeed on your trip, and I hope to talk to you when you come back.
Thanks, Jim. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.